So just tell me a little bit about what sparked the whole movement originally in the United States. You know, what was behind it? People saw the footage on the TV, but then, it does seem to have been organised in big cities all over the States. Tell me all about how it grew.
Oh, absolutely. So if we talk about the Black Lives Matter movement and the originators, I mean, it was co-founded by three community organisers, Alicia Garza, there was Patrice Cullors, and there was Opal Tometi. And they founded Black Lives Matter actually 6 years ago, I think now, around 2013. And they created it in response to men, mostly. There is women as well, that had been killed unlawfully by the police. It was in response to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murderer. And Trayvon Martin was tragically killed back in 2013. So these community organisers came together and formed Black Lives Matter. And of course, since then, many, many times they've come out to organise protests against the deaths of Sandra Bland, Eric Gardner. Gosh, there's just, unfortunately, so many of these people that have died at the hands of the police. And so, of course, we saw the deaths recently of Breonna Taylor. We had the death of Ahmaud Arbery and the death of George Floyd as well. George Floyd killed at the hands of police, as was Breonna Taylor. Ahmaud Arbery, we know, that was killed by two retired police officers. And those have happened over the past, say, month. And let's not forget the countless others, because there has been so many over the years. And that's what's kicked off the latest protests that, like you so rightly said, have gone worldwide. So they started off in Minneapolis almost 2 weeks ago now, obviously spread to LA. There's been protests across every single state in the United States. That's never happened before. And now it's all over the world, from Sydney to Paris, Tel Aviv, here in London, everywhere. Mexico, there are marches in Ghana as well. Everywhere has come out in support of Black Lives Matter. And it does definitely feel like there's some sort of seismic shift taking place, that this time around, the people that are at the marches are not just black people, and it's always been that way. The marches have been very mixed, but this time, more so than any other time that I've been reporting about Black Lives Matter since 2013. It's disappointing that 7 years later, this story is still here, and we're still doing it. We're still covering these marches, but these marches do feel different this time.
Afua, are you there?
I am, Martin. I'm still here.
I'm sorry we had all sorts of technical issues, but I think we got your explanation of why now, after this latest incident, which I suppose, would you call it the sort of straw that broke the camel's back, or do you think in some way it's connected with the fact that we were all living in this sort of heightened times with coronavirus and everything else, and especially with black people being more affected by that than white people? Do you think any of that had an influence on why the movement became so much more powerful than it has been in the past?
I think that's a couple of very good points, actually, that you've made there. I think the footage of George Floyd being murdered by those police officers was so particularly shocking in this instance. The fact that, he was there for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, which is a long time for someone to be kneeling on your neck. I think the footage shocked people. And I think COVID-19 actually could be part of it as well, because, like so rightly said, we have measured, or the disparities have been measured here in the UK and in the United States, that there is various socio-economic issues that have meant that black people are more likely to die, depending on what more report you read. I know here in the UK it's between 2 times and 4 times more likely to die of COVID-19. African Americans are more likely to die from COVID-19 as well. So I think there is a sense that, once again, black and brown people are being forgotten. And, there is 2 pandemics at play here. There is the COVID-19 pandemic, but then there is also this pandemic of racism. And unfortunately, at the receiving end of this pandemic are black and brown people. So I think it's a combination of both things. Perhaps this video of George Floyd is the straw that broke the camel's back. And I do think people are angry about so many things in America and around the world. You know, they see consistent police brutality. It's caught on video, and sometimes it's not. You know, we also had the video of Ahmaud Arbery, and it was not until that video came out that the two people that were responsible for his death were charged. It wasn't until the video was released. You know, and there's definitely a sense that people feel that, well, unless it's caught on tape, no one's going to take it seriously. So there's a number of factors, I think, that have made this particularly the flashpoint.
Yes, and how much you know, when you look at it, it's you know, the history of African Americans. When you look at the history, they had segregation. They had segregation right up until the 1970s, really, and then even when segregation went away, there was a sort of segregation anyway. You know, that still persisted. The same attitudes persisted in America. We didn't have segregation over here. We had racism. I know when the Windrush generation came over from the West Indies in the 50s, the mid 50s, you know, you found signs on flats and boarding houses saying no blacks and all that sort of thing. So we're clearly not, you know, we clearly have got a history of racism, not quite as much as the United States have, because they had segregation there. But clearly, when we see the demonstrations in the UK, there's a feeling that racism is still rife in Britain as well.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think when it comes to America, because you so rightly said, they had slavery and segregation, they had a civil rights movement, and so definitely the issues in America, I know a lot of America is still very segregated. Even though officially segregation has ended, a lot of it is still segregated, and people see that and know that. And I think because you've had the civil rights movement, it means that it's always kind of bubbling on the surface there. Of course, here in the UK, we didn't have the same thing. We still have racism. We still have systemic racism. And it's in the constructs, the very constructs of society. It's within
when you
the
say
education service, the prison service, the health service.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, when you say systemic racism, and you hear the expression institutional racism, you know, in the police force and so on, do you think that after Stephen Lawrence and all that, and the Met Police seem to work quite hard in that area after that, are you saying that the Metropolitan Police, for instance, let's just take them as an example, is still institutionally racist?
I would say so, yes, I would say so. I would say that after Stephen Lawrence, pardon me, some things did change and there was moves to make changes, but you still have sweeping powers of Section 60 or stop and search. Police themselves have acknowledged that stop and search predominantly targets young black men, and that is an institutionalized, racist act that is used by the police to stop black men. I mean, you will have black men driving cars being pulled over every single day. You know, I've heard a story of someone who's in my network who was delivering food to people in his community during COVID-19 and was pulled over in his car because he looked like someone who was suspected of a crime because he's black. It's that simple. The police are trained to stop and search those type of men because they are seen as aggressors, and that is institutionalized racism.
Just to take it from the other side, the police are in, and I'm talking particularly about the Metropolitan Police, they're in a difficult situation in that on the one side they're getting a lot of pressure saying, we must stop these killings of gangs, we must stop the sort of gang warfare, and when you get turf battles, that sort of thing, which are predominantly young black men. So they are getting that, heat, please stop this killing. We've seen the things on the telly where the parents of black people who've been killed in sort of turf wars and that sort of thing, drug wars and everything. So they're trying to trying to clamp down on that, but at the same time, they're trying not to be, after Stephen Lawrence, there was a great move not to be institutionally racist. They're in a bit of a difficult situation. They're walking a bit of a tightrope there.
I mean, the police have got a job to do, absolutely, and we know that. We know that obviously there has been issues with knife and gun crime across all our major cities across the UK. I think what we have to realise is that yes, a lot of the gangs are predominantly young people, not just black. Predominantly men, but not just men. You have female gangs as well. But a lot of these gangs that exist, especially when you're talking about county lines gangs, is to do with drugs that is predominantly consumed by rich middle class white men in the city of London. So yes, the police do have a job to do, but you have to think about why these gangs exist in the first place. And there is a sort of there's a perception that they are predominantly young black men, and that's the young black men are in gangs, the young white men are in gangs as well. The issue of gangs and gangs violence is such a huge one, one that I definitely think needs to be treated the way it was in Scotland, where it was seen as a public health issue, and it was targeted in that way. And now, I grew up in Scotland. I grew up near Paisley, which was the stab capital of Europe. And it was treated as a public health issue. And knife crime fell by something ridiculous, like 80%. What you need to do is you need to take race out of knife crime and race out of gun crime. It's about the socio-economic factors. That's why people end up in gangs carrying knives in the first place. It's about the factors that get them there. If you deal with it as a public health issue and take out the issue of race, that's how you do it. It's not about militarizing our police at all. It's about dealing with the public health crisis of knife crime.
Okay, now I had a conversation about all this with my daughter who's 19, and she said to me, it's not enough not to be racist. We had an argument, discussion about racism. Just these days, it's not enough just not to be racist. You have to be actively anti-racist, which I assume is that, well, she's well on board with that, and she's trying to get me on board with it. I want to know what I do, other than going out and joining a demonstration in the street, what do I do to be actively anti-racist?
I think that it's actually a very good question. I'm sure a lot of people are asking themselves the same thing. So, I mean, protesting is one thing. I'm sure we'll come back to talk about that. But it's also educating yourself about white privilege, educating yourself about ways to make sure that there's fairness and equality in your workplace, in your community, in the interactions that you have. It's standing up when you see racism happening. It's fighting against systemic racism. It's doing the work. And this is a phrase that I seem to have used so many times over this week, but it's about doing the work. It's about doing things and actively making sure that you're standing up against racism all the time and in everything you do, and standing up for equality. And, it does sound like work, doesn't it? It does sound like work to be every day, making sure that you're reading this or being across this. But, as a black person, that's your everyday reality, that, you will come across some sort of racism, whether it's in the health service or education or wherever you turn. It's always there. So, yes, it's work, but it's unfortunately about putting that in there.
Yes, but the attitude that a lot of people will have is, I'm just one guy, I'm just one person. Do you know what I mean? And The racism that I've come across in a football ground, actually, which I did start, I told a steward about it, and he did nothing, but I did tell a steward about it. It was a match I went to at Preston North End, who had a black striker at the time, and somebody was shouting at him and using racial abuse, and I told the steward, and he did nothing, which is the sort of thing that happens. You know, you can stand up against it when you see it, and I know if you're black, you'll see it all the time, you'll feel it all the time, you'll know it's there all the time. But if you're white and privileged, you know, we hear a lot about white privilege. If you've got that white privilege, it's unlikely, depending on how privileged you are, but it's unlikely you'll come across it on a regular basis.
I mean, that's the thing. When you put it like that, you know, the best thing to do is what you did at the football match. Is to stand up for that person, to stand up and say and point it out and say, look, this is racist. You can point it out to someone who's in control and has the ability to take control of that situation. And unfortunately, they didn't do that. It's about continuing to do your part, however. You know what I mean? It's about continuing to stand up for these things. And yeah, it can be difficult. And like you said, we see them all the time and every day. But it's about continuing to do that. And one person in their corner doing something is better than nobody doing anything at all. No, if you think your contribution is small, at least you're making that contribution. You know, I've seen a lot of things written this week about, you know, people want to march, people can't march. You know, people don't want to march because of COVID-19. There's different things that people can do in their corners, having difficult conversations with your family, like the conversations you've been having with your daughter. It's about having those difficult conversations with family members. It's about picking up some books, reading up on things, watching some videos. There's lots of things that every man can do, and nobody should think that their contribution is.
Okay. Do you think it will change, you know, the current wave of protests that we've seen, as I say, in various towns in the UK, in Leicester, in London, also over in Paris, and right across America? Do you feel confident that it'll change things?
I would like to think so. I mean, I don't know about you. I've never seen widespread protests like this all around the world for one cause. And I would like to think that because the movement has been so galvanized that things like businesses, you know, institutions will sit up and think and look at themselves and say, okay, what are we doing about diversity? What are we doing to make sure that the black lives that we have within our company matter? You know, there was earlier on this week, there was Blackout Tuesday, where you had lots of individuals and companies posted the black square and said they were muting themselves, they were going to have conversations with their staff. And that's all very well and good, but what are you doing in your boardroom to make sure that you're representative? What are workplaces? Are you having these conversations about race? That's what I would think these protests will do, is that hopefully they will change things within businesses, within companies, within institutions, so they can make sure that Black Lives Matter, not just when someone is dying on the floor with a police officer's knee on their neck, that they matter every single day in the workplace and in the decisions that are taken within businesses. That will really be something, and that will be certainly very important. And I hope that this will have some effect.
Well, let's hope so. Afua, it'd be lovely to welcome you to the studio again when when I say all this, I mean coronavirus, hopefully gets solved. So apologies for all the technical problems, but bless you for coming on. I do appreciate you coming on, and hopefully a change is going to come, to quote Sam Cooke from all those years ago. Afua, thanks ever so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Hopefully I'll see you in the studio soon.
I hope so. Afua Adom there, journalist, broadcaster, joining us to talk about Black Lives Matter and allied issues.